If you have a wheat penny in your pocket right now, stop, because you might be holding a hidden treasure without even knowing it. Most people spend it like nothing, but some of these old pennies can turn out to be incredibly valuable. One small detail, one rare mistake, or one perfect condition coin could completely change everything you think about this ordinary-looking penny. So before you ignore it, take a closer look, because this tiny piece of copper might be worth far more than you ever imagined. If you have ever casually ignored a small copper coin lying in an old drawer, a piggy bank, or even under the sofa cushions, you might want to stop and pay attention right now, because what you are about to hear could completely change the way you look at everyday change forever. There is a coin that millions of people once held in their hands without a second thought, spending it on candy, groceries, or bus fare, never realizing that decades later, it would become one of the most talked about collectible pennies among coin enthusiasts. That coin is the 1948 wheat penny, a small piece of American history that carries far more story, mystery, and collector interest than most people could ever imagine. Now imagine this for a moment. You reach into an old box, and there it is, a simple brownish copper penny with wheat stalks on the back. At first glance, it looks completely ordinary, almost forgettable. But what if that single penny is not just a coin, but a silent witness to a turning point in post-war America, a relic from a time when the world was rebuilding itself after the chaos of World War II? That is exactly what makes the 1948 wheat penny so fascinating. It is not just about money. It is about history frozen in copper. The story begins in the United States Mint, where in 1948, the country was still adjusting to life after the war. Factories were shifting back to civilian production, families were rebuilding their lives, and the economy was entering a new phase of growth and stability. In the middle of all this, the humble Lincoln wheat cent continued its long run, a design that had already been in circulation since 1909. By 1948, the wheat penny had become a familiar sight in every American's pocket, but no one at the time imagined that these coins would one day become highly collected pieces of numismatic history. The design itself is simple yet powerful. On the front, you see Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, a symbol of unity and perseverance. On the back, two wheat stalks frame the words 1 cent and United States of America. That design, created by Victor David Brenner, was meant to honor not just Lincoln, but also the agricultural strength of the nation. It represented stability, growth, and the everyday life of American citizens. The 1948 version carries that same classic design, making it part of one of the most beloved coin series ever produced. But what makes this particular year interesting is not just its design, but its place in the timeline. The 1948 wheat penny belongs to the late wheat series, which ended in 1958 before being replaced by the Lincoln Memorial reverse design. That means the 1948 penny is among the final decade of wheat pennies ever minted. For collectors, that alone gives it a special kind of historical importance, because it represents the closing chapter of an era. Now here is where things get exciting for collectors and curious minds alike. The 1948 wheat penny was produced in massive quantities, with hundreds of millions minted across Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Because of this high mintage, most of these coins are still not extremely rare in circulated condition. You might even find one in a coin jar today if you are lucky enough. However, what makes coin collecting fascinating is that rarity is not always about the year alone, but about condition, errors, and special variations. For example, a heavily circulated 1948 wheat penny might only be worth a few cents to a couple of dollars. But if you find one in uncirculated condition, with its original red copper shine still intact, the value can rise significantly, sometimes reaching tens or even hundreds of dollars depending on grading. And then there are error coins, the real hidden treasures of numismatics. These can include misstrikes, double dies, off-center strikes, or unusual minting variations. A rare error in a 1948 penny can dramatically increase its value, sometimes reaching several $1,000s in exceptional cases when certified by professional grading services. But let's be very clear here, because this is where many people get misled online. A standard 1948 wheat penny is not worth tens of thousands of dollars in normal condition. Claims of extremely high values like $80,000 are not realistic for this coin in typical market conditions. However, The excitement comes from the possibility that a rare mint error, combined with perfect preservation and collector demand, can elevate certain coins far beyond their face value. That is what makes coin hunting so thrilling. It is not about every coin being valuable, but about discovering that one unexpected piece that stands out from the rest. Think about the journey of this coin. It may have passed through countless hands in diners, gas stations, grocery stores, and pocket change across America. It may have been dropped, scratched, saved, or forgotten. And yet, some of these coins survived decades without being melted, lost, or destroyed. That survival alone gives them a kind of quiet dignity, as if they were waiting for someone in the future to rediscover their story. Collectors today look at the 1948 wheat penny not just as currency, but as a historical artifact. It represents the craftsmanship of mid-20th century minting, the economic recovery of a nation, and the everyday lives of ordinary people who unknowingly carried pieces of history in their pockets. That emotional connection is something modern coins rarely replicate. If you ever find a 1948 wheat penny, the first thing you should do is examine its condition carefully. Look at the color, the sharpness of Lincoln's face, and the detail in the wheat stalks. A bright reddish-brown tone often indicates a higher-grade coin that has not been heavily circulated. Also check for any unusual markings or errors. Even small differences can sometimes make a big impact in collector interest. Many valuable coins are discovered not in museums or auctions, but in old collections stored in jars, boxes, or inherited belongings that were never properly checked. Another fascinating aspect is the emotional side of coin collecting. For many people, finding a wheat penny is not just about money, it is about connection. It connects them to grandparents, to childhood memories, to a time when coins were made of real copper and had a heavier, more tangible presence. The 1948 wheat penny sits right in that emotional space, bridging generations through something as simple as pocket change. Even though it is not the rarest coin in the wheat series, its appeal lies in accessibility. Unlike ultra-rare coins that most people will never see, the 1948 penny is something you actually might come across. That possibility alone keeps collectors searching, hoping that the next coin they pick up could be something special. And this is where the real lesson lies. Value is not always obvious at first glance. Something that looks ordinary can carry hidden importance, whether historical, emotional, or financial. The 1948 wheat penny reminds us that history often hides in plain sight, waiting quietly in the most unexpected places. So the next time you see an old penny, do not rush to ignore it. Take a second look. Turn it in your fingers. Check the date. Because while most will remain simple pieces of copper worth only a cent, a few rare ones could tell a much bigger story than you ever expected. In the end, the 1948 wheat penny is not about instant riches or unrealistic price tags. It is about history, patience, and the thrill of discovery. It is about understanding that even the smallest objects can carry the weight of decades, and sometimes, just sometimes, they can surprise you in ways you never imagined. If you have ever looked at an old handful of pennies and thought they were nothing more than leftover pocket change, you might want to stop right now, because one of those small copper coins could carry a story that most people completely overlook. And sometimes, the most ordinary-looking penny is exactly the one that collectors are hunting for the hardest. Today we are talking about the 1961 D wheat penny, a coin that at first glance looks like just another worn piece of copper, but in reality, it sits in a very interesting spot in American coin history. It comes from a time when the wheat penny series was already nearing its final chapter, and the United States was transitioning into a new era of coin design. That alone makes it a fascinating piece for collectors who understand what to look for. Imagine holding a coin that passed through the hands of people living in the early 1960s, a time when America was changing fast. New technology, cultural shifts, and economic growth were shaping everyday life. And in the middle of all that change, the 1961 D wheat penny was minted at the Denver Mint, quietly entering circulation and blending into millions of pockets, wallets, and cash registers without anyone realizing its future collectible value. On the front of this coin, you still see the familiar face of Abraham Lincoln, one of the most respected figures in American history. His portrait is sharp, classic, and timeless, reminding us why the wheat penny design lasted for decades. On the back, The iconic wheat stalks frame the words 1 cent and United States of America, a design that symbolizes growth, agriculture, and national strength. It is simple, but deeply meaningful, and that is exactly why collectors love this series so much. Now here is where things start to get interesting. The 1961 D wheat penny was produced in extremely large numbers at the Denver Mint. That means in normal circulated condition, most of these coins are not rare. Many of them still exist today in old collections, jars, and even in everyday change. In fact, you might have already seen one without realizing it. But coin collecting is never just about how many were made. It is about condition, preservation, and mistakes that happen during the minting process. And this is where the real excitement begins. A regular, heavily circulated 1961 D wheat penny might only be worth a few cents or slightly more to collectors. However, if the coin is in uncirculated condition, with strong details and original copper shine, its value can increase significantly. Coins that still show that bright red copper luster are especially desirable because they represent pieces that were never heavily used in daily commerce. But the real treasures are the error coins. These are the coins that were never meant to be perfect. During minting, small mistakes can happen, and those mistakes can turn an ordinary penny into something highly collectible. The 1961 D wheat penny is known among collectors for certain varieties such as minor die errors, off-center strikes, and unusual doubling effects. When these features are clear and verified, collectors may pay far more than face value, sometimes reaching into the hundreds or even thousands depending on rarity and grading. This is why experienced collectors never ignore a wheat penny just because it looks common, because sometimes the difference between a normal coin and a valuable one is not obvious at first glance. It can be a small detail in the lettering, a slight shift in alignment, or a subtle doubling that only becomes visible under close inspection. Think about how many of these coins have been lost in time. They were used to buy coffee, candy, gas, or groceries. They were dropped on sidewalks, thrown into drawers, forgotten in old wallets, or stored in jars for decades. Most people never thought twice about them. But a few of those coins survived in better condition than the rest, and those are the ones collectors are still searching for today. There is something exciting about that idea, because it means valuable discoveries are not just locked away in museums or auctions. They can still be found in everyday places, hidden in old family collections or forgotten boxes in storage. That possibility keeps coin hunters motivated, always checking dates, mint marks, and tiny details that others ignore. The 1961 D wheat penny also represents the final phase of the wheat penny era, which ended in 1958 when the design changed to the Lincoln Memorial reverse. Even though this coin came a few years after the wheat design officially ended, collectors often compare coins from this transitional period because they reflect the last echoes of the original wheat series legacy. And that is what makes this coin more than just metal. It is a connection to a time when money was simpler, when coins were made of real copper, and when everyday transactions had a physical weight and presence that modern currency often lacks. So if you ever come across a 1961 D wheat penny, do not rush to dismiss it. Look at it carefully. Check its condition. Observe the shine, the details in Lincoln's face, and the sharpness of the wheat stalks on the reverse. And most importantly, look for anything unusual, because small imperfections are often where the real value hides. At the end of the day, this coin teaches a powerful lesson. Not everything valuable looks rare at first sight. Sometimes, value hides inside ordinary objects, waiting for someone patient enough to notice it. And in the world of coin collecting, patience is exactly what separates a simple penny from a prized discovery. So next time you see a small copper coin dated 1961 with a tiny D mint mark, don't ignore it. Because while most will be just pennies, a few might carry a story, a rarity, or a surprise that makes them far more interesting than anyone expected. If you have ever dumped out an old jar of pennies and thought it was just worthless change, you might be holding something far more interesting than you realize, because sometimes the smallest coins carry the biggest stories, and one of those coins is the 1953 D wheat penny. Now before you dismiss it as just another old copper coin, imagine this for a second. A coin that was minted over 70 years ago, passed through countless hands, survived decades of inflation, wars, cultural change, and economic transformation, and somehow still exists today in pocket change, old collections, and forgotten drawers. That is exactly the kind of journey the 1953 D Wheat penny has lived. At first glance, it looks completely ordinary. A brown copper penny with Abraham Lincoln on the front and wheat stalks on the back. Nothing flashy, nothing unusual. But that's exactly why so many people miss its importance. Because in the world of coin collecting, the most overlooked coins are often the ones with the most hidden stories. The 1953 D Wheat penny was minted at the Denver Mint during a very interesting period in American history. The country was in the post-World War II boom. Industries were growing, families were rebuilding, and everyday life was becoming more modern. Cars were becoming more common, television was entering homes, and America was stepping into a new era of prosperity. And in the middle of all that change, this small copper coin quietly entered circulation, ready to be used and forgotten. On the front, you still see Abraham Lincoln, one of the most iconic figures in American history, symbolizing unity, leadership, and resilience. On the back, the classic wheat design frames the words 1 cent and United States of America, representing agricultural strength and national growth. This design, created by Victor David Brenner, had already been in use for decades by 1953, but it still carried the same powerful identity that made the Wheat Penny series one of the most beloved coin designs ever produced. Now here is where collectors start paying attention. The 1953 D Wheat Penny was produced in large numbers, which means it is not considered rare in normal circulated condition. Millions were minted, and many are still floating around today in old coin jars, estate collections, and even occasionally in pocket change. So if you find one, it is not automatically a jackpot. But coin value is never just about mintage. It is about condition, preservation, and those rare unexpected mistakes that happen during production. A heavily circulated 1953 D Wheat penny might only be worth a small premium over face value. However, as soon as you move into higher grades, the story begins to change. Coins that have sharp details, minimal wear, and especially those with original red copper luster can become much more desirable to collectors. That original red color is important because it shows the coin has not been heavily oxidized or damaged over time, making it far more attractive in the collector market. But the real excitement begins when you start talking about error coins. This is where things get interesting for collectors who know what to look for. The 1953 D Wheat penny is known for occasional minting variations such as die cracks, repunched mint marks, and slight misalignments. While these may sound small, in the world of numismatics, small details can create big differences in value. An error coin is basically a mistake that escaped the mint. And because each mistake is unique, no two error coins are exactly the same. That uniqueness is what collectors are willing to pay for. A properly verified error version of a 1953 D Wheat penny in strong condition can sometimes sell for significantly more than a regular one, especially if the error is clear and visually noticeable. But here's something important to understand, because many people get misled online. Not every old penny is rare, and not every coin is worth thousands. The 1953 D Wheat penny is valuable in certain cases, but most examples are still common collector coins. Its real value comes from condition, rarity of specific errors, and demand among collectors, not from hype or exaggerated claims. Still, that does not make it any less exciting. Because even if most examples are modest in value, the possibility of finding something unusual is what keeps collectors searching. That's the thrill of coin hunting. You never really know what is sitting in an old box until you actually take a closer look. Think about the journey of this coin. It might have been used to buy groceries in the 1950s, handed over at a gas station, or dropped into a cash register without a second thought. It could have been stored in a mason jar for decades, forgotten in a drawer, or passed down through generations without anyone realizing its potential significance. And yet, here it is today, still existing, still waiting to be discovered. That is what makes the 1953 D Wheat penny special. Not just its age, but its survival. It is a physical reminder of a time when coins were made of real copper, when money had weight and texture, and when everyday life moved at a slower, more tangible pace. Collectors love this coin not because it is the rarest, but because it represents accessibility. It is the kind of coin that anyone can potentially find. Unlike ultra-rare numismatic treasures locked away in museums, the 1953 DeWitt penny still has a chance of appearing in everyday life. And that possibility keeps people excited. So if you ever come across one, do not rush to overlook it. Take a moment, turn it in your hand, look closely at the details, check the condition, the color, and especially the mint mark on the reverse side. Because sometimes, what looks like an ordinary penny can turn out to be a small but meaningful piece of history. At the end of the day, the 1953 DeWitt penny is not just about value in dollars. It is about connection to the past, curiosity, and the excitement of discovery. It reminds us that history does not always sit in museums. Sometimes, it sits quietly in your pocket, waiting for someone to notice it.